The blue calico hung from Sheriff Dalton's thick fingers like a dead thing, torn and stained with something that wasn't mud. Thomas McKinnon felt the world tilt sideways, his coffee cup slipping from numb fingers to shatter against the jailhouse floor. "Found this down by Miller's Creek," Dalton said, his voice carrying the lazy indifference of a man discussing the weather. "Probably some drifter woman got herself into trouble. You know how it is." Thomas knew that dress, every faded flower, every careful stitch along the hem where Catherine had mended it just last month. He'd watched her fingers work the needle by lamplight, humming that old song her mother used to sing, the same song he hadn't heard in 3 weeks. "Thomas," Dalton's voice seemed to come from underwater, "you look like you've seen a ghost." The rancher forced his eyes away from the fabric, meeting Dalton's pale stare. Something flickered there, too quick to catch, too careful to be natural. "Just tired, Sheriff. Haven't been sleeping well since Catherine took off with that traveling salesman." Dalton folded the dress with practiced efficiency, stuffing it into a burlap sack. "Women, they get restless. Happens to the best of us." But Catherine hadn't run off. Thomas knew it in his bones, the same way he knew when a storm was coming or when cattle were spooked. She'd been hanging wash that Tuesday morning, singing to herself as she always did. He'd ridden out to check the north pasture, kissing her goodbye at the gate. When he'd returned at dusk, the wet clothes still hung on the line, stiff as corpses in the wind. "Found anything else down by the creek?" Thomas kept his voice level, though his hands trembled as he bent to collect the coffee cup fragments. "Nothing worth mentioning." Dalton's boots scraped against the floorboards as he moved toward his desk. Few tracks, but the rain washed most everything away. The rain had come 2 days after Catherine disappeared. Thomas remembered standing in it, letting it soak through his shirt as he searched the creek bed for any sign of her. The water had run red with runoff from the iron-rich hills, but in his mind it had looked like something else entirely. "I'll be heading out to the Mackenzie place tomorrow," Dalton continued, settling his bulk into his chair with a grunt. "Old man's been complaining about missing cattle again. You might want to ride along. Fresh air might do you good." Thomas straightened slowly, every muscle in his body coiled tight. The Mackenzie ranch sat 15 miles east, in the opposite direction from Miller's Creek. "Convenient. I'll think on it." "You do that." Dalton's smile never reached his eyes. "And Thomas, stop dwelling on things you can't change." Catherine made her choice. The door closed behind Thomas with a soft click, but the sound echoed in his chest like a gunshot. Outside, the afternoon sun painted long shadows across the dusty street, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since his wife had vanished like smoke, and everyone in town, everyone except him, seemed content to believe she'd simply chosen to leave. But Thomas McKinnon knew his wife, and he knew that Dress had never been 15 miles from home. The ride back to his ranch stretched endless under the copper sky, each hoofbeat marking time he didn't have. Thomas's mind churned over Dalton's words, the way the sheriff's fingers had lingered on that blood-dark stain, the too quick burial of evidence in burlap and lies. Catherine's sewing basket still sat beside their bed, her thimble resting atop a half-finished quilt square. Thomas had touched nothing in their bedroom, afraid that moving even a hairpin might somehow erase her completely. But now he pulled the basket onto his lap, running weathered fingers through spools of thread and fabric scraps, until he found what he was looking for. The remnant matched perfectly, same blue, same tiny yellow flowers. Catherine had bought the cloth from the mercantile last spring, enough for 2 dresses. She'd finished the first for Sunday services, but the second had remained cut pieces pinned to brown paper, waiting for time that never came. "Proof," he whispered to the empty room. But proof of what? That his wife was dead, that the sheriff was lying, that Thomas McKinnon was about to make a choice that might get him killed. The front door groaned open, and for one heart-stopping moment, he thought Catherine had come home. Instead, Miguel Santos stepped inside, hat in hand, worry etched deep in the lines around his eyes. "Patron," Miguel said softly. The old vaquero had worked the ranch for 15 years, had taught Catherine to ride, had been the one to help Thomas search when she first went missing. "I heard you went to see the sheriff. He found her dress." Thomas held up the fabric remnant. "Down by Miller's Creek." Miguel's face went stone still. "Quemas. Nothing else, he says. Just a dress." Thomas stood pacing to the window that faced town. "Miguel, if I ride out tonight, if I don't come back, you will come back." Miguel moved to stand beside him. "But not alone. This isn't your fight. Senora Catherine, she is good woman. She give my Elena medicine when the fever came. She never look at me like I am less than human." Miguel's voice carried the weight of old pain. "If someone hurt her, is my fight too." Through the window, dust clouds marked riders approaching from town. Too many horses, moving too fast. Thomas felt ice form in his stomach as he counted 5, maybe 6 riders, all heading straight for his door. "Miguel, take the back way to your house. Get Elena and the children out of town tonight. Instead, I'm going to Miller's Creek. Tonight. If Dalton's telling the truth about that dress, there's nothing to find. But if he's lying..." Thomas checked his rifle, the metallic click loud in the stillness. "Then my wife deserves better than a coward for a husband." The riders were close now, close enough to see Sheriff Dalton's silver badge glinting in the fading light, close enough to see the hard faces of the men riding with him, faces Thomas recognized from the saloon, from cattle drives, from darker rumors whispered in shadows. "Patron," Miguel's voice was urgent, "they come for you now." Thomas nodded grimly. The choice was made, had been made the moment he saw Catherine's dress hanging like a surrender flag from Dalton's fingers. "Then we better give them something to remember." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied by the jingle of spurs and the soft whisper of leather holsters being loosened. Outside, men called to each other in low voices, positioning themselves around the house like wolves circling wounded prey. Sheriff Dalton's voice boomed across the yard. "Thomas McKinnon, step outside, we need to talk." But Thomas McKinnon was done talking. His wife was out there somewhere, and every minute spent in conversation was another minute she might not have. The war for truth was about to begin. "McKinnon," Dalton's voice cracked like a whip across the yard, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Thomas pressed his back against the wall beside the front window, rifle ready. Through the glass, he could see shapes moving in the growing dusk, men spreading out, taking positions behind his own barn, his own fence posts. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet could. "What do you want, Sheriff?" Thomas called back, buying time to think. "Just want to talk. About your wife. About things you might have said in town today." Miguel had vanished through the back door like smoke, but Thomas could feel the old vaquero's presence somewhere in the gathering darkness. Loyal to the end, even when the end looked like tonight. "I didn't say anything that wasn't true." Dalton's laughter carried an edge of hysteria. "Truth's a funny thing, McKinnon. Sometimes it's better buried deep." The admission hit Thomas like a physical blow. Dalton knew, had always known. The dress, the lies about Catherine running away, all of it calculated to keep Thomas quiet, keep him grieving instead of searching. "Where is she?" Thomas's voice broke on the words. Silence stretched taut as a bowstring, broken only by the soft whinny of horses and the distant bark of a coyote. When Dalton spoke again, his voice was closer, too close. "Some things are better left alone, McKinnon. Your wife, she saw something she shouldn't have seen. Asked questions about cattle that weren't stolen, about brands that got changed in the dark. Smart woman, too smart for her own good. Cattle rustling." It made sense now. Dalton's convenient trips to investigate theft reports, his dismissal of ranchers' complaints, his sudden wealth despite a sheriff's salary. Catherine must have pieced it together, maybe even tried to warn Thomas. "She went to you," Thomas said, understanding flooding through him. "She trusted you." "She did." Dalton's voice held no remorse, right up until the end. A board creaked on the front porch. They were closing in, confident now that talking time was over. Thomas counted muzzle flashes in his mind. 6 men, maybe 7, too many for a fair fight, but fairness was a luxury he couldn't afford. The first shot shattered the window beside Thomas's head, sending glass cascading like deadly rain. He rolled left, came up firing, watching one of Dalton's men stumble backward off the porch. The return volley turned his front door into splinters. "Miguel," Thomas shouted, not sure if his friend was still alive to hear. The answer came in the form of rifle fire from the barn loft, Miguel's position giving him a clear shot at the men using Thomas's own property for cover. 2 more men went down, their screams cutting through the night air, but there were too many, always too many. Thomas felt the burn of a bullet creasing his shoulder, another punching through the wall inches from his head. They were herding him, driving him toward the back of the house, where more men waited. "Give it up, McKinnon." Dalton's voice was ragged now, desperate. "You can't win this." But winning wasn't the point anymore. Finding Catherine was the point. Making them pay was the point. Thomas grabbed the oil lamp from his kitchen table, hurling it against the wall where it exploded in a burst of flame and fury. If they wanted to burn down his life, he'd give them a proper fire to remember. The flames caught quickly, too quickly, racing up the dry timber walls like hungry ghosts. Smoke began to fill the house as Thomas crashed through his back door, rifle blazing into a night that had become a war zone. Behind him, his home, their home, began to die in orange light and black smoke. Ahead lay darkness, danger, and the truth about what had happened to Catherine McKinnon. The old mine shaft opened like a wound in the hillside, hidden behind a curtain of scrub oak and shadow. Thomas had found it by following the tracks Miguel had spotted, boot prints and drag marks leading away from Miller's Creek, carefully hidden but not hidden enough. His shoulder burned where the bullet had grazed him, but the pain kept him sharp, kept him moving when exhaustion threatened to drag him down. Behind him, the glow of his burning ranch lit the horizon like a false dawn. Ahead, only darkness and the terrible certainty that Catherine was here, somewhere in this forsaken place. The mine had been abandoned for 20 years, played out and forgotten by everyone except those who needed somewhere to hide their sins. Thomas struck a match, the small flame revealing timber supports black with age and walls that seemed to press inward like grasping fingers. "Catherine," his voice echoed strangely in the confined space, coming back to him distorted and hollow. The answer was a sound so soft he almost missed it, a whisper of movement from deeper in the tunnel. Thomas moved forward, the match burning down toward his fingers, casting dancing shadows that made the darkness seem alive. He found her in a natural chamber where the mine widened, chained to an iron ring driven deep into the rock wall. Catherine looked up at the sound of his approach, and Thomas felt his heart break all over again. She was thinner, paler, but alive, blessedly, impossibly alive. "Thomas," her voice was paper dry, but her eyes burned with the same fierce spirit that had made him fall in love with a school teacher from back east. "I knew you'd come." He was beside her in 3 strides, hands trembling as he worked at the locks holding her chains. "I'm sorry. God, Catherine, I'm so sorry it took me so long." "Hush." She touched his face with fingers that shook from weeks of captivity. "You're here now, that's what matters." The locks were too strong for his knife, but Thomas found a hammer among the old mining tools scattered around the chamber. Each blow against the metal rang like a bell, loud enough to wake the dead, but he didn't care anymore who might hear. "Dalton," Catherine asked as the first chain broke free. "Dead or dying?" Thomas moved to the second lock. "Miguel got him when they tried to burn me out." Catherine's laugh was brittle as winter ice. "He was so proud of his clever plan. Keep me here until you stopped searching, then make me disappear permanently. Said no one would ever think to look for a dead woman." The second chain parted with a sharp crack. Catherine sagged forward, and Thomas caught her, holding her against his chest like he'd never let her go again. She smelled of fear and darkness and survival, but underneath it all, she still smelled like home. "The cattle operation," she whispered against his shoulder. "It's bigger than just Dalton. Men from 3 counties, changing brands, selling stolen stock in Denver. I saw them that day, saw them working your cattle. It doesn't matter now." "It does." Catherine pulled back to look at him, her eyes fierce with purpose. "They killed the Hendersons last month, made it look like Apaches, but I saw Dalton's ring on the hand that struck the match. How many more will die if we don't stop this?" Before Thomas could answer, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the mine entrance. Multiple riders, moving fast and hard, either Miguel with help, or Dalton's remaining men come to finish what they'd started. Catherine struggled to stand, her legs weak from weeks of confinement. "There's another way out," she said, pointing toward a narrow passage at the back of the chamber. "Connects to the old stamp mill. I've been planning." The sound of boots on stone cut her off, voices coming closer. Thomas recognized none of them, which meant Dalton's corruption ran even deeper than they'd imagined. He helped Catherine toward the passage, but she was too weak, too slow. They'd never make it in time, unless someone stayed behind to buy them the chance they needed. No, Catherine's grip on his arm was steel strong despite her weakness. We go together or not at all. But Thomas McKinnon had already made his choice. He pressed his rifle into her hands, kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. Follow that passage to the stamp mill. Miguel will be waiting. I sent him word about this place before I came in. Thomas, live Catherine, for both of us. The voices were closer now, echoing off the mine walls with predatory confidence. Thomas counted at least 4 men, maybe more. He checked his pistol, 3 rounds left. Not enough for a fight, but enough for what needed doing. He waited until Catherine disappeared into the narrow passage before stepping into the main tunnel, hands raised in apparent surrender. The men who emerged from the darkness wore the faces of neighbors, friends, people he'd trusted. The corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Well, said Marcus Webb, the bank president who'd approved Thomas's last loan. Thomas McKinnon, come to join his dear wife. Where is she? Thomas kept his voice steady, buying Catherine precious seconds to reach safety. Safe and sound, don't you worry. Webb's smile was all teeth and malice. You'll be together soon enough. Funny thing about mines, Thomas said conversationally, never know when the supports might give way. He pulled the stick of dynamite from his coat, taken from his own supply, meant for clearing stumps. The fuse was already lit, had been burning since he'd heard the horses approaching. Webb's eyes went wide with understanding. You're bluffing. Catherine was the bluffer in the family. Thomas's smile was sharp as broken glass. I was always more direct. The explosion brought down half the mountain. Thomas woke to sunlight and the sound of Catherine's voice calling his name. He was lying in their bed. Not their bed, he realized, but a bed in Dr. Morrison's house in town. Catherine sat beside him, clean and dressed in a new blue dress that wasn't torn or stained with blood. The mine, he asked, collapsed completely. You were the only one they pulled out alive. Catherine's hand found his, squeezed gently. Miguel got me out through the stamp mill, just like you said. He had half the territorial marshals with him, and Webb's operation, finished. The marshals found records, evidence, everything they needed. Turns out Webb and Dalton weren't just rustling cattle, they were selling them to the army under false contracts, stealing from the government itself. Thomas tried to sit up, winced as pain shot through his ribs. How long? 2 weeks. You've been unconscious for 2 weeks. Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. The doctor said. He said you might not wake up. Can't get rid of me that easy. Good. She leaned down to kiss him, soft and careful. Because I have plans for us, Thomas McKinnon. Big plans. The door opened to admit Miguel, hat in hand, grinning from ear to ear. Patron, you are awake. Miguel. Thomas gripped his friend's hand. Thank you. De nada. Besides, you burned down the house. Where else was I going to work? They rebuilt that spring. Not just the house but everything. The barn, the fences, the trust that had been shattered along with so much else. Catherine planted a garden where the old house had stood, said she wanted something beautiful to grow from the ashes. Years later, when their children asked about the scars on their father's chest, and the way their mother sometimes woke crying from dreams she wouldn't describe, Catherine would tell them this. Sometimes the world breaks good people for no reason at all, but if you're lucky, if you're blessed, you find someone willing to walk into the darkness to bring you home, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, you both make it back to the light. The blue dress hung in their closet for the rest of Catherine's life, mended but never forgotten. She'd kept it, she said, to remember that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. On quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, Thomas could swear he still heard the echo of that mine collapse, not as a sound of destruction, but as the moment when everything broken finally began to heal.